Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about internal comms today. I know we have a lot of really good content and a lot of great perspectives. I'll tell a little bit about myself. So I do employer branding at Kogo Labs. We're a startup incubator in Kendall Square. So anything from internal comms to external branding and things like that. So a lot of employee experience and engagement and culture as well. So I'll just have all of our panelists go around and introduce themselves. We'll start kind of where the top of the box is for me. Victoria, if you want to kick things off.
Hi, good morning. I'm so excited to be here. So my name is Victoria Dew. I'm the founder of Dew Point Communications. And so I guess I am a startup, sort of, although I've had my business for a bunch of years. But we help people power businesses to communicate better with their employees every day so that they can drive better employee experience, engagement, and get those key business outcomes. We work with companies actually from startups up to Fortune 50 to help them build values-driven cultures that are great places to work. One of the reasons I love working with startups is that with very large enterprise clients, we call it culture transformation. And so I really love working with companies when they're much smaller so that we don't have to transform the culture way down the track. I have been doing this work for maybe 15 years. So I actually spent most of my career in Asia Pacific and New Zealand. And I came back to this country about 5 years ago and discovered that there's a big difference between corporate New Zealand and corporate America, and quickly realized that it was going to be a better fit for me to take my expertise and work with companies individually. So I built my first company. I built my first internal communications function in 2006 for a company of about 300 people and have been doing that ever since. So I'm really excited to be here and to learn from Valerie and Tiffany and Molly. This has been such a great week, and I've learned so much from the whole event. So glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Valerie, you can go next in order of screen.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here also at this panel. So I'm Val. I run the HR department at Cambridge Semantics, which is an awesome graph and semantics technology company, about 100 people. And my background is kind of in that space, in that kind of smaller technology space, working with some awesome engineers and kind of in that smaller, scrappier type environment. So I'm happy to be here also and to learn from the group.
Awesome. And Tiffany?
Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. My name is Tiffany Mosier. I'm the head of people for Patient Ping, which is an e-notification, basically enterprise SaaS technology firm for the healthcare industry. And we're helping to coordinate care, which is a very broken thing across our country in healthcare. It's a very exciting place to be with amazing employees. I've been there for about 1.5 years now.
Awesome. And Molly?
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Gillis. I am Chief Communications Officer at General Catalyst. We are a venture capital firm with offices across the country. We've almost $8 billion under management, and we invest in technology companies from seed stage all the way up through growth stage and beyond. My function straddles both internal and external communications. Really excited to be here today for Startup Boston and to share some experiences with my fellow panelists. Thanks.
Awesome. So we'll kick things off. Similar to a note that Molly just touched upon, what are some of the mediums or platforms that you've seen and changed in terms of communications as you've scaled? So from that early stage to as you've grown as an organization, how have you changed mediums or platforms? And Molly, you can kick us off if you'd like.
Oh, sure. So I think initially we were using email for almost everything. And I think in particular during COVID, we've become really intentional about which platforms we're using and how we're using them. So during COVID, we really tried to scale back the amount of emails that we're sending in terms of internal comms, broad internal comms about the team changes and where to find information. We're using it very sparingly, and we're really trying to encourage folks to use Slack more broadly. So we've set up various channels for team announcements, for virtual events, because we do virtual workouts together and have happy hours and things like that a few times a week. We've also upped the amount of time that we get together for all hands meetings. So the beginning of COVID, we're doing all hands a couple times a week. with time now, it's every other week for about 45 minutes on a focused topic. So it's a few different things. Slack, definitely, email sparingly, and then in-person meetings for sure.
Great. And anyone else want to add on to that? Tiffany, I know you had some thoughts as well.
Yeah, just very relatable to everything that Molly said. We in this remote world that we're in, and we have been in since March, I think it's really, really important to have as much touch base with your employees as possible in this kind of setting with video on over Zoom. I like to remind people of the Moravian reference to the communication model of, trust, believability, and effectiveness in communication. Only 7% comes from the actual words spoken, and 38% comes from, tone and the way that the words are spoken, and 55% comes from body language, facial expressions. So the more that you can get on video, the better to have that effective communication and that trust and believability in communication. So at Patient Ping, we do Monday team check-ins every single Monday. And some people, when I say that to some of my CHRO friends outside of Patient Ping, are like, wow, that's really frequent. We do monthly. I love it. It's a quick hit. It's scheduled for 30 minutes. We go over, topics that are top of mind, important to the business. We remind employees of things through that channel. We also use Slack and email. And what I say about Slack is I like to use Slack like I would use texting, like in texting. Don't memorialize too much in Slack. Use email for a memorialization of a business decision or something like that. But that's how we roll at Patient Ping. There's no such thing as over communication.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think kind of leading into that too. So how do you go about sharing internal news effectively and transparently, such as employees leaving, new hires, promotions, anniversaries, things like that? How do you all go about doing those things effectively?
Yeah, I think what's important is when I think about this, especially like somebody leaving, I think there's a group that's kind of like in the know and a group that's not in the know when this happens, like people that are working with them or people, that they know. But I think you can always try to bridge that gap of people that are in the know and people that aren't. So it's really important whenever you can do that. So if like somebody's leaving, I think it is really important to tell the whole company in advance. I think that just helps people feel more connected. And I do like to, you do want to celebrate people in a way, though. I think there's also, if you're celebrating a promotion, there's other people that didn't get a promotion. So I feel like there's striking a balance with that kind of thing is important. And then I think when a new hire, especially in quarantine, is so important to be sharing that you have a new hire, some fun facts about them so people can kind of remember who that person is and connect with them. And then also like, what are they going to be doing in the business, and really kind of showcasing how that person fits in the specific role that they play. I think that's really important to communicate.
Yeah, we do a ton of communication around employee news in particular. So there's a specific announcement that goes out over Slack that's designed in line with our brand identity. When a new person starts, we do also talk about their hobbies and try and give some personal facts as well. They also get announced the firm-wide. So there's like sort of a moment where all new employees are announced. And then the other thing that we put in place over the last 6 months is an internal newsletter that goes out over email every single Friday. It includes all the news that's been communicated over Slack and email, and then other fun news as well, including we do an employee interview every week as well. And that goes out every Friday without fail. And so everyone knows if you didn't catch it in the firm-wide, you can catch it in the employee newsletter. And if you didn't catch it in either of those two places, you can try and scroll back through Slack and the individual announcements. But those are the two places where we really aggregate employee information, because we feel it's important to both communicate in writing and internally. You got to hit them at least twice.
Exactly.
What Tiffany and Valerie and Molly are hitting on is also something that's really important to call out, which is the listening piece, right? Very often, and we hear this a lot from chief executives, who are like, we need to communicate too, right? And it's as much about two-way communication and making sure that people feel heard and seen. especially in this remote environment where it can feel like they're out there, right? And we don't always know what's going on with them. So listening is actually, and I hear a lot about companies that have been doing really great work in pulse surveys during this time, and that's awesome. And the communication piece is also creating forums, environments, two-way ask me anything, exactly kind of what Tiffany was talking about, where they can really engage and be heard. And I think as long as you're always building in that listening, people feeling seen and heard, that's really great practice and will pay great dividends.
I often remind people it's very obvious, but we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use them proportionately.
Yeah, that's great. So how would you say that you're leveraging other colleagues at the organization or people at various levels to spread communication and ensure that communications are being seen? So maybe that's content via LinkedIn or through social media sources. How are you ensuring that people are really becoming ambassadors for your brands?
Yeah, the way that I've always tackled it in the various organizations I've been a part of is I always look to, per department, who's the employee or employees that folks gravitate to, that folks hold in high regard, that folks look up to, and make sure that I have a strong connection with that employee or group of employees to help be a champion of communication, of connectivity. So if I feel that there is something that needs a little shot in the arm, if you will, from a participation standpoint, or just in general communication, I go to those folks and I leverage them and ask for their assistance. And most overwhelmingly, they're so happy to oblige and feel recognized for the fact that there's someone that can help affect in a positive way communication and connectivity. So find those people in your organization if you haven't already.
Tiffany's calling out something, which is that difference between an ambassador and an influencer, right? And I think we're very used to that in the external world, but making sure that the people who are influencers, everyone plays different roles in an organization. There's catalysts and challengers and connectors, right? And making sure that we do have a sense of who those folks are. And again, that listening post, right? So helping them to be ambassadors, but also they're your eyes and ears on the ground that can help you uncover things that you might not know otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. So switching back to internal comms, how do you ensure that the external press releases that are happening are being communicated internally successfully so that people are really getting a lot of clarity on what's happening inside and outside of the org? I mean, especially prior to everyone else externally.
So for us, for external news, we do a daily feed for the full team. It goes out to the firm wide, and it covers both news at General Catalyst as well as news in our portfolio companies. In addition to that, if there's really big news that's happening that we think people are going to have a very strong emotional response to, we do a couple different things. One, it gets shared with the managing directors and the leadership of the firm first. And then typically sometimes we even have special firm-wide meetings where we also make the announcement to the firm as well, so that they have that information first as well. And then again, it's the verbal and written. So typically after all those in-person meetings happen, there's a short message that goes out to the firm over email as well to let them know what's happening. And with that, we've just taken the approach that, we trust our employees and we trust them to keep the news secret until it's put out over the wire or announced formally. And that's me, I think that our employees really value.
Yeah, ditto on patient ping. That's a great approach, Molly, and it's one that we follow as well. And it works really, really well.
Also sending out sample posts that people can post just to so it's pretty simple and it's, thought free for them. And then also, they can kind of feel part of that conversation as that they get to share it as well.
To Valerie's point, there's something about feeling, about having, and as there's a question in the chat about different groups and diverse, right? Because as you scale, you start to create silos and segments, employee segments, right? And different audience segments, just like in an external or environment. And so making sure the biggest thing, no matter how big you get, is that the information is contextualized and localized for that employee segment. So not just assuming that this is going to say that someone in an engineering group and a product group is going to understand it, perceive it, and care about it the same way. So that always going to the audience centric, like what's in this for me? How does this affect me? My role, what I need to know to do differently. And of course, we could talk for 100 years about the role of the manager, right? In that.
Yeah, and kind of on a similar note, in terms of scaling, how have you maintained clarity on what projects or initiatives are happening across different departments as you continue to grow? I think when you're really small, it's easy to see, I mean, just by proximity, who's working on what and what things are happening. How do you maintain that as you continue to scale an organization?
At Patient Ping, we rely heavily on what we call our OKR process. So we have overarching OKRs for the business on an annualized basis, and then quarterly by department. And we try to communicate exactly what each department is trying to achieve and how that ties to the overarching strategy. And then when we have our, what we call our state of the ping on a quarterly basis, update all employees in regards to how we're trending, against those OKRs. So that's just one of the ways Patient Ping tries to get at that, Braden.
Yeah, I'll say too at Cambridge Semantics, so we have a weekly company-wide meeting, and so every other week we'll do like a feature of the field where somebody will talk about like a product release or something like that. But also what I really love is we do a weekly kind of department knowledge share where someone from, like, for example, last week, like our UI team, which doesn't normally get to like present that much, and it's 2 people, and they talked about their background, their history, and then what they do at the company and the projects they're working on. And it's really nice to have people that don't normally get to present talk. And it's very impressive to hear people kind of talk in their element and the work that they do. And then you feel a little more clued in as well about the whole process. So I think that's just a really nice way for kind of win-win for everybody when that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, definitely. And what would be some of, I mean, a lot of tools are being used all the time, and there are so many new platforms that people are on. How do you introduce or kind of train new employees or current employees on tools that you want to leverage in order to really create dialogue and conversation within the org, create engagement, and really improve the culture in that sense? Because we know that like these tools are just vehicles to getting to the actual root of the culture and the experience.
I mean, for us, Slack, everybody wanted it, and then we got it, and it lost a little bit of momentum. And so it was really funny at the beginning of COVID, that was part of the driver too, was trying to just drive more engagement on Slack. So we said, all right, all the virtual events, all the like sort of fun announcements, all that is going to be on Slack on these 2 channels. So it also just drove people to it. We tried to create content that we knew people would want access to, and then create channels around that content on Slack. So, I mean, you get to give people a reason to use the tools. You can't force it. And that's actually worked out really well for us, but that's just one example.
One of the things I see is this, well, I see a few things. One, I've seen in this, in the pandemic, there are companies that have had platforms in place or apps or things that they were struggling a little bit with adoption, that got the shot in the arm they needed and got rapid adoption because of the need. And the other thing I see though that is that I think sometimes there's a desire to like solve a people problem or communication problem with an app, which is great. And it's also remembering that it's not actually the solution, right? Even though it says like platform solution, it's not actually the solution, because so much of the solution, to Molly's point, is the content. And so it's kind of like with a platform, it's a little bit like a puppy, right? It's like, it's really cute at first, but you have to keep feeding it, and you have to be consistent, and you have to create compelling, sticky content that's like, that does kind of keep people there and is useful, right? And the other thing is, I always say, start before you introduce a new platform, look at like, where are people already? You know what I mean? Like before you do buy a whole different thing, is there a platform people actually already have adoption? Sometimes with like enterprise clients, very big legacy kinds of clients, I see them doing the workplace by Facebook because they have a much more seasoned employees who know how to use Facebook. So that's easier for them, right? That's not right for everyone, but it's an example of like, go where people are first and then figure out your way around, but really taking a considered strategic approach.
Can I ask a question? Can I break the rules a little bit? We were just talking about Slack. I'm just wondering what Slack channels that you guys have used that like are really effective or things like that. Do you have like a kudos channel or like, I'd love some tips on Slack channels since we're talking about it.
We have a praise channel that our employees love, and it's very utilized, so much so that now we tell employees and utilize the information that's posted in there to pick our quarterly, what we call our quarterly Pingers Award. So who we recognizing and rewarding for, going above and beyond. And again, that information and how we pick those people comes through our praise channel at Slack. So that is probably one of the best ones that we have. We have 1 million though, so we might over index and have too many channels. It's hard to kind of keep up, but that's one. Also, just having a general Slack channel where you put a bunch of general information is one that is heavily used at Patient Ping as well. But we have fun ones like little pingers. So our parents will post pictures of their kids, or our employees who aren't parents but have animals will post pictures of their animals. I got to tell you, when I'm having a little bit of a stressful afternoon, I love to jump in there and see pictures of Finn the golden retriever, and it puts a smile on my face. Or to see one of my colleagues' adorable little children. That's kind of a fun, shot in the arm that employees need from time to time. So I love those, Val.
We have a good news and kudos channel. We had good news and kudos, and then we combined them because this Slack channel is getting out of control pretty quickly. So we also, I'm just looking at it now. We also have like gossip and chatter for what happens around the industry, which people seem to really like. And then at the beginning of COVID, we set up a parent support group, which I am off and on. Yeah.
Yeah, I recently introduced like a community channel for us. So essentially, like, what are you doing? Like maybe people are volunteering, or little things that I think people forget to be cognizant of is your colleague. Maybe someone drives someone home from the office when we were in the office, or like little things like that just remind you that people are more than just who they are at work, and they can bring that other part of themselves into the office too, in a way.
And the other thing is, right, if you have ERGs, employee resource groups, right, and incorporating those, because there is so much, there's COVID and there's life and there's the whole world, right? And so making sure that in that kind of transparency and making sure that those conversations are available to people.
Yeah, definitely. Touching upon that too. So in this current climate, these unprecedented times, what advice can you give to someone that's really growing their internal comm strategy, especially if maybe they're starting that strategy in this new era that we're in, where they maybe haven't been implementing this prior to? What advice would you have for those folks?
Communicate often. And through the different channels, as much as you can get in front of people. And I know Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and I have it and I experience it. But again, getting back to employees seeing your facial expressions and your body language is so important. But I kind of like the trifecta approach. So doing it like this in this kind of medium, and then if you have a designated Slack channel for what you're talking about, put it in there as well. And then kind of last but not least, maybe memorializing in an email. But coming back to it, I mean, it's a proven fact that folks need to hear something new on average 13 times before it sinks in. So anyone starting up at communications at a new company, new startup, I tell them that first and foremost. So again, going back to what I said earlier today, there's no such thing as over communication. So you can do it in a multitude of different ways that are effective, but just do it as often as possible so that people are on the same page. Lack of alignment, lack of communication, I think is really the root of all evil, whether it be in your professional life or your personal life.
I'll also say what Victoria talks about is like listening, and I've been thinking about that a lot, especially in this remote culture, and especially as part of inclusion is getting different people's thoughts and opinions and getting them to weigh in, and not everyone is comfortable, if you have a company-wide meeting, asking a question there. So I've been trying to think about that. And, so if I'll have a company-wide meeting, I'll tell people, you can Slack me if you want, and I can ask it, or maybe, those surveys are a great way for people to feel more comfortable. Just trying to figure out what's really comfortable for your people, and for a diverse group and a variety of people to share their input, I think is really important to discover for yourself.
I agree. I think going out either through like a pulse survey that's anonymous, asking office managers to ask around on your behalf, calling people is really helpful. I think getting the input before you get started or as you're getting started is really important. Another thing, Val, that we put in place in preparation for our firm-wides too, especially as we moved to fully remote, was we actually put in an anonymous anonymous Google form so that people could ask questions anonymously in advance, and it just collects into a spreadsheet. But our culture is just the type where, you ask people at the end of a meeting, no matter what the topic is, if they have questions, and it's like crickets. And I'm just not a big fan of planting questions. It's a little insincere. So we did put that Google form in place, and we get at least a couple of questions per meeting most of the time. So I found that to be pretty effective.
Same. I've done that at every company. Have an anonymous ask the CEO that gets addressed at your all hands meetings, however frequently you hold them. You always want to create a safe space for employees to ask questions that there's no fear in asking.
One of the things I think I agree is really important about when you're developing an internal communication strategy, right, is like you do any strategy, is really looking at where you're looking to move the needle in the business. What are those critical business outcomes that communications is going to help? This is like the conversation has come up in a lot of the people ops tracks, for people ops and for communications and some of those functions that were traditionally seen as cost centers, right? It's really important that we demonstrate that value to the business and to the bottom line, because otherwise it's vulnerable. The people stuff is always going to be vulnerable if it's not driving towards the bottom line. So starting to look at where you're actually looking to move the needle. Is it recruitment, retention? Is there a link to the engagement? Is it customer satisfaction, client retention, right? Where are those key things that affect the P&L sheet? And then looking at building it out from there, and then incorporating like all the kind of people-centric things, because we know, of course, that comes down to people being able to do their jobs really well and really effectively. But I think I always start there. What is the problem? Kind of like we'd say in any department, what is the problem you're trying to solve, and how does this contribute to that? And then backing into everything else, because there's so much to do. There's so many things you can do. There's so many platforms. There's so many tactics. And so you need to be really judicious and strategic about how you choose them, because you can't do everything. No startup can do everything. Not enterprise clients can't do everything, right? So we have to be really smart about where we put that focus.
And I also think, we've touched upon surveys. Surveys are great, and they're one mechanism to collect information. The role of the people strategy business partner is profoundly important, and being proactive and not reactive. In getting out there, talking to folks, understanding the pulse. Every other quarter, our people strategy business partners have one-on-ones with our employees. What's going well? What's not going so great, and why? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super excited, how excited are you on average to get out of bed every morning and come to work at patient paying? So we don't just rely on one particular mechanism to understand the pulse. So that proactivity of getting out, really knowing your employees, getting to know them on a personal level. If they have kids, know their kids' names, make that connection. Hey, how's little Jack doing today? That's really, really important. It helps the connectivity, but it also helps to inform what employees want to hear about.
Yeah, I'd also add, like, to that and everything that's been said, to being remote for me for the first time, I really have a very different perspective of what it is for all those remote people. And I just, I feel like I'm kind of grateful actually for that opportunity, for that perspective shift, is that, you know, what I'm like, oh wow, what would this be like if I was the only person in the company that was remote? And so I feel like try to use that and try to put yourself in those person's shoes, and try to kind of learn from this experience of being in quarantine. I think like a lot of companies are going to be adding video more than they had been when we do go back to normal. So I just think, you know, think about what you can learn from this time, as well as important.
You know what else too strikes me with pulse surveys, and which is, so I agree, it's such a powerful tool. And there's two things. One is, you know, people talk about survey fatigue, and I know a lot of companies have done such an amazing job doing pulse surveys during this time to get a sense of what's going on. And one thing is, like, it's like when we talk about survey fatigue, very often it's not that people are tired of being asked for their opinion. They're tired of being asked for their opinion and then not having anything happen. So I think of surveys as like a promise, right? And then from a communication standpoint, one of the most critical things is, you said we did. You said we did. And keeping that, like, we heard this and we took this action, and creating that virtuous circle of telling them, like,
Link and label.
Lincoln label.
Yeah.
And the other thing that is a little bit, and this is kind of from the marketing world, is the difference between, there's a little caveat, is the difference between stated preference and revealed preference, right? So people might say that they want one thing. Like if you ask people, do you want kale or Fritos? They're going to say they want kale, except the Fritos are like flying off the shelf, right? So sometimes people know there's a right answer. So there is a kind of aspect of applying some additional rigor or methods to figuring out, just because people say that, like, if you have kids, right, your kids will tell you what they want all the time. It's not necessarily. So how to negotiating that and communicating that back and the outcomes in a way that is respectful and, you know, transparent, right?
I think one other thing too that's nice to do when you do the surveys is leave space to say, if you're interested in meeting with us and sharing your thoughts live and providing some more context for your responses, please, you know, just putting in place some sort of tool for people to be able to do that. So it's not just a quick survey. If people actually want to engage and connect, there's an opportunity for them to do so, especially right now.
Totally agree. And part of it is actually driving some ownership back to the employee, right? It's not just enough to like sound off, but it's like, okay, well, here's a time, but you can come, but show up and have a conversation about it. But there is taking some responsibility for like being engaged in the process, not just like, we want Fritos, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I heard about a company that they'll do like small, you know, all hands that are just like 10 people, but you have to sign up for it. So kind of to Victoria's point of like that ownership, like, okay, you can, you know, like really take charge of being at this meeting and being present and asking questions and things like that, I think is a unique opportunity. Yeah. It's so funny. Said like, oh, sorry. It's so funny when I was gonna say, it's so funny when you talked about survey fatigue. We all knew what you were gonna say. Like, it's so true. It's like that, like people aren't sick of the survey, they're sick of, and it's like, yeah, not getting the results. Like, it's so, we knew exactly, like, it's so true what you're saying.
Yeah. And to the point about the, like, you can have as many 10 people, you know, but there is a thing too, I think we are so focused on how we as organizations can help deliver really great employee experience. And employees also have a role to play in their employee experience, right? And so where we have that partnership, that's where you're going to get the best results.
Yeah. So shifting over a little bit to questions that people have been asking, I think this has a lot of urgency, especially for where we're at right now. What are some of the ways that you are delivering or giving news on a company-wide or maybe individual basis? Maybe it's layoffs or challenging news on like the corporate level of what's happening with revenue or anything like that. I think this is something that a lot of smaller startups are going to see. It's really challenging to communicate to a wider audience, especially on that one-to-one level as well. So what are some tips you have for people in that realm?
I would just say, transparency is awesome. I work for a very transparent organization. I'm a very transparent leader. The way I feel is the more information that our employees have on our business strategy, on our competitors, et cetera, the more equipped they are to be successful in what they're doing day to day and how they're going about doing that. There are times when, there's organizational changes or reductions in force that you can't be that transparent up front. You can after the, impacted employees are told of their role change or things like that. But always protect the confidentiality of the employee. And if that is protected, then my rule of thumb is to say, be as transparent as possible.
To Tiffany's point, I was going to say about radical transparency. The other thing is they think is so important on that one-to-one basis is really equipping your managers, right? So making sure, we know we have, especially in startups, you have a lot of people that have not been people managers before. And I always get nervous saying people leaders because sometimes people hear people eaters. So I like to say leaders of people just to avoid confusion. One day I'm going to do a blog post called Be a People Leader, Not a People Eater. Anyway, it's going to be hilarious. So one of the things is making sure that, thank you, thanks, that your managers really have those communication skills, that they're equipped, because it's nervous. And then there's this Simon Sinek post that's flying around, LinkedIn about how millennials and Gen Z they can't communicate. And they don't like to have confrontational conversations, right? And I'm agnostic about, I don't think anyone likes to have confrontational conversations, but those managers are the core, right? If you think about teams as learning pods, right, they are. And so making sure that you don't hang them out to dry and that they can have really, really sincere, transparent conversations, because don't forget that the way out of when someone's leaving a company, you have an opportunity to, if someone who on the session yesterday called red carpet in, red carpet out, which I thought was brilliant, right? That's like, those are your brand ambassadors that are walking out the door. So make sure that you equip your managers and your teams to make sure that that's the case, right? It's a small town, so,
Yeah, another question that someone asked that I think is really pertinent is when your executive team is maybe not so much on board or just doesn't utilize different platforms for internal comms, how do you help to kind of get the people that live under that part of the org to adopt those platforms? Or how are you also aiding in getting the executive team to adopt those platforms as well?
Patient ping is just constant communication, getting out there, understanding the pulse, what employees want, and bringing it back to, we have an executive staff meeting every Monday morning for 2 hours. And I mean, that's the platform that I utilize when needed to, talk about or discuss those kind of things, Braden.
I know sometimes it can feel there's different kinds of executives, there's different kinds of founders and CEOs with different levels of comfort, right? And in one sense, it's like it can feel like leading a horse to water. So depending on that, but as someone leading internal communications, you have to find, first of all, you have to have that be in lockstep and really strong relationship and trust with the executive team, and find the channel that works for them. Sometimes they will do a recorded video. You have to find something and find that little thin end of the wedge that they're comfortable with, and then build it out from there. But being a leader and an executive means that you have to take responsibility for this. It is part of your job to figure this out. And it's as someone leading internal communications, it's your job to really work with them to figure out how to enable that. It almost doesn't matter what it is, but it has to be something.
It's kind of funny for us. I mean, I think we had some senior leaders who are a little reluctant to get on Slack, and we move forward anyways because we have such a strong millennial presence among our employees. And we did it, and guess what? They got on board because the news was happening off to the side without them, and so they ended up joining in the conversation. It happened very organically in that way. So I also would say don't be discouraged either. If most of your employees are asking for it and wanting to use a certain platform, I say at least try it and see what happens.
Yeah. So also Zoom fatigue is so real. I know we've touched upon this a little bit, with the exception of right now. What are other ways that you are finding to really think outside of the box in terms of maybe events or camaraderie, really bringing people together? I know it's like little things that we've been implementing at our org. I think like cameos have been really helpful. People love them. Definitely recommend checking those out. But like little things like that where you're really bringing in outside resources or maybe kind of like getting events to shift into sort of the digital space a little bit.
Yeah, Zoom fatigue is a real thing, as we've said. And, what we're trying to do at Patient Paying is just mix things up a little bit. We started by having, as a way to connect employees across the organization, right? I talk to my folks in my people team and G&A probably more frequently than everyone else. So how do you stay connected with the folks in the other organizations? We launched a capture the flag tournament online. It was hilariously fun. Teams of 3 going against each other, and then we had a viewing party for the final round, the championship playoff, where we could all have commentary. We did a similar thing with Scribble. We try to bring in a guest speaker once a month to do what we call Fireside Chats or ping pongs, because our name is Patient Paying, to ping pong back and forth information. So when COVID hit, as an example, I was able to bring in an infectious disease doctor and talk to our employees and educate them about what the virus was and what can you do and should you do, et cetera. And then, 2 months later, we brought in 2 psychologists to talk to our employees in regards to psychological, health and wellness and what we can do in this world of, quarantine and living and working under the same roof, especially too if you've got, not the ideal home setup, right? Too many roommates, not enough space. If you're a parent, your kids are on, Zoom, you got internet issues because everyone's trying to use the Wi-Fi. So things like that can just help our employees from an educational standpoint. We've tried to leverage a lot of, and then every once in a while, I got to be honest, when I have my one-on-ones, I have weekly one-on-ones with my direct reports. Sometimes I'll be like, do you want to just talk on the phone? How about we don't get on video? And, I know that I say that, facial expression and nonverbals is such an important piece, a huge piece of the overall effectiveness in communication. If you know your people really, really well, which you should, it's okay every once in a while to let them have a break from Zoom as well as yourself.
I totally agree with that, Tiffany. We do that all the time. It's like, I already know what you look like. You know what I look like. We know each other well enough. We don't need to be on video. A couple of the other things we did was also in terms of, trying to create the connectivity, but understanding people have Zoom fatigue, is hosting events where people can bring their kids and families into. So for the parent group, we did a couple of like play dates where the kids could get dressed up. It was in the middle of the workday to give parents, this was like when school was in session last spring, to give parents a break. The kids all talked to each other. We read books every once in a while. That was one thing we did. And then another thing we did is we got Ming Tsai to come in and do a cooking demonstration with us. And we did it at a time that worked for both West Coast and East Coast. People could invite their immediate family. My parents joined from California. And that was something that was just so successful because it wasn't really just employees. It was an opportunity for people to bring their friends and family into the GC community. So I would encourage trying to think a little outside of the box in that way too, and expand it to like kind of help keep families interested. Everyone's stuck together all day long. Everyone's trying to come up with activities. So I think to the extent that employers can help with that, I think it's really valuable.
Just hopping in before on the thinking outside the box, because I popped something in the chat and I realized it could be really confusing without context. So I met this woman the other week who she has this Instagram thing called Living with Pickles, and Pickles is a pig. And companies hire her to come and have Pickles Zoom bomb their meetings. And she comes in and brings Pickles like suddenly into a big team meeting, and then there's a pig there. And I don't know, it's adorable. But I just love that, like, there's something about back to surprise and delight, like this random pig turns up in your meeting. And like, I'll tell you what she's doing. It was really interesting to learn about her business, because I call her a pigfluencer, because she's got a great business there, right? She's got a whole animal sanctuary. So I popped it in the chat because I know it looks kind of weird, but that's that kind of thing, something really unexpected, right?
Oh my gosh, that would be hilarious to pull out at my next team check-in on Monday and just, bam! Here's a little pig.
Yeah.
Watch everyone's reactions. I like that, Victoria. I might have to look into that
I
a
wish
little
I
bit.
thought of it. Well, I put the link in, Living with Pickles.
Yeah, I think overall it's like about kind of just like conceptually at a high level, like it's about mixing it up for sure. And it's about adding variety. So whether it's social or educational, small group, big group, and then just checking in with people and seeing if it's working, asking for their ideas as well as important. So I think, yeah, I think that'll help with the fatigue though. It's like the variety of it, the different ways and yeah, just checking in with people.
We did also a Teach Me series, so employees could volunteer to teach their craft to employees. So we did everything from origami to cooking to, I'm a wannabe equestrian. I own a horse, so I did a demonstration from my barn on tacking up my horse and grooming my horse, and all the kids joined. You know, the employee, I probably had 17 or 18 of our employee children on the phone, and we just made it fun. So there are a whole way that you can try to, you know, to slice this and get at that Zoom fatigue, but it's definitely difficult.
Yeah.
I think it's here to stay, right? It's like
It
is what it is. And we are right at the beginning. You know, if we think about the next 12 months, we will not be in the same place with Zoom fatigue. It will be different in 6 months. We don't quite know what it's going to look like, right? And how our relationship with all these channels and working
Right.
in this way is going to evolve for us emotionally, psychically, right? But so it is on the role of the communications person and HR person, people ops, to keep thinking about that. And again, staying really audience centric and employee centric. What's going to get us the best result? What do people need?
Right.
And I think another, just a very easy thing to employ is we recommend to not book a meeting over the lunch hour, you know, from 12 to 1, like have everyone off Zoom if you can. If there's not a burning, you know, emergency or need, you know, try to not book anything at that time. And we have individual departments that have put together their own rules. You know, engineering has no meeting Wednesdays, so they can just head down and code. So there are, again, little ways that you can, you know, help all your employees out by giving them a little reprieve from the Zoom meeting fatigue syndrome that we're all faced with.
Yeah.
We've actually closed our offices a few times since the beginning of I mean, not just physically closed, but like we gave folks the week off, Labor Day week off, the entire week, because we just felt like people were on Zoom around the clock, working around the clock. Yeah, we've probably done maybe, I don't know, a week and a half, 2 weeks of vacation time over the last 6 months, where we just said everyone's off, everyone just needs to take a breath and get some rest. And I think that's been really helpful.
That's huge. That's huge, Molly. We don't have an accrual policy. We have unlimited PTO at Patient Ping. Wink, wink, nod, nod for anyone out there. Candidates listening, potential candidates listening. It's a great perk that Patient Ping offers. But when you all aren't off together,
Yes.
still that, oh my gosh, the psychological, like I still have to check Slack, I still have to check email. So we gave the long weekend around Labor Day. We gave Juneteenth off as well for education, reflection, etc. Given all the social unrest happening in our nation, and every once in a while we will do that. Hey, we're going to give employees that time off, because again, employees can take time off whenever they want. But if everyone else is working, it's not the same break.
Absolutely.
And that's very important point. When you shut it down for everyone, so everyone can truly unplug.
Yeah, definitely. The last thing I'll want to add to about this whole like events and things is just keep in mind keep track of who hasn't gone to one, and because you do want to make sure it's working for everyone. Not everybody is social, so like a happy hour or something, it just isn't going to work for them. So you know, and there's something to a little bit kind of pushing like people, like, so it's like, okay, you know, every department's going to present on this, and it kind of just breaks them out of that shell, and I think that kind of opens the floodgates for them to start participating. So but really keep an eye out for those who haven't gone to something, and really try to find a way that they can be included here. I think that's really important.
Really great point, and it really speaks to inclusion and belonging, right? We know that there are people who are deeply introverted, who may have neurodiversity. With this, right, there may be circumstances that this does not, these little boxes do not work or allow them to do their best work. Over time, we are going to have to figure out how to really make sure that we're not leaving people behind. One of the things I hear a lot about in pulse surveys is that you get a lot of good feedback, but there's a whole big chunk of people, you might have 40%-ish of people that don't respond, right? So there's those lost employees that we're like, well, where are they exactly? And making sure that we don't have kind of performance dropouts just because we're not creating channels and formats that work for people.
Yeah. So we've got about like 5 minutes left. So maybe we'll just go and everyone can kind of give like one really great tangible takeaway for people who can really start to implement something. Maybe that's today, this week, next month. Maybe this is something that you've started implementing post-COVID era and you highly recommend will transition into even when you get back to the office at some point. Just anything that you think would be really helpful for people that are either at the very beginning stage of internal comms or already have a fleshed out strategy, but just need something to really elevate it a little bit.
I can help. I can happen. Like one of the things that, like I hear and I see a lot is everyone's just firing on all cylinders and everyone's just going, right? And that just that opportunity to stop, take a breath, take a beat, and it speaks to the Zoom fatigue and the overwhelm, but just like be really strategic and deliberate. You don't have to do all the things, but just taking that pause to be like, what do we actually want to achieve? What does success look like? And what are those really critical things in terms of communications that need to happen so that we get out of this cycle of overwhelm, because it's not sustainable. We're starting to see it, right? We're starting to see the cracks and there's no end in sight. We're on this change journey with no end in sight. So try and take that beat to take a strategic approach.
Love it.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah, I think that's very well said too, of just pausing, self-reflecting, and that this quarantine culture is just such a different culture. You've had a complete culture shift. And then we all had to get to that mindset of like, oh, this is actually long-term. Like, oh, this is actually happening. So just trying to continue, you knew what your culture was when you were in the office, but now it's a whole different culture. So just trying to be as self-reflective and open to change, open to ideas as possible, and open to learning and going to things like this and hearing from each other, I think is really important.
One of the things that Patient Ping has is donut chats through Slack. So you'll just get randomly paired with an employee to get together and have a 30-minute chat. I think those are so beneficial, and just connects you with people that might not be in your stream of your workday, your workflow, et cetera, but that connectivity can be really helpful. And for the more introverted folks to have a perspective from an employee in a different, department, organization level, et cetera, can be really helpful. So if you haven't employed donut chats, maybe that's something to look into too.
I think flexibility, to Val's point, is key, and staying nimble. I also think connectivity for everyone is just so important, feeling connected to the organization. And that's really our role, is to help provide that connectivity. I also worry a bit as we head into the winter months, people feeling more isolated, more alone. So just trying to get creative with how to help people feel more connected, and also just reminding your employees that their health and well-being is, front and center in everything that you do.
Definitely. I'll add to that. I think this 40-minute limit on Zoom is the best thing that's ever happened to our society. I think that should be taken in the future. So if you have an hour-long meeting in person at some point, we know it can be 40 minutes now. Like, we are cognizant that 40 minutes is doable. So I think that's something that's really nice as well, is distinct meetings are equally effective.
Yeah, try to send that agenda out in advance, and when you open up that meeting, like, okay, here's what we're trying to solve for today. Here's our agenda, and try to have someone keep you on point. It's much more effective, and you can get out of there in 40 minutes versus 60.
Definitely. Well, thank you all so much.